Counselor for Local Planning. Good morning, afternoon. I'm Robin DeFalco with the Local Planning Capacity Grant. And we know that some folks who are new grantees couldn't join us today. It's summer. Folks may be out of town or have other commitments, but we're recording so that we can share with everyone. And we'll make this recording available on our webpage after the fact, so you can always refer back to it or share with colleagues. And we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Robin DeFalco, and I want to introduce my colleague, Jessica. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Roop, and I am a program assistant for LPC.
So Jessica and I are going to be the two main contacts for all grant-related things. We are both here for you to help whenever you need help, and we encourage you to always copy both of us when you're emailing. Reach out by phone to either one of us. We try to both be on the same page about all requirements and what's happening so that we can provide you support. And if I'm tied up in meetings, Jessica may be more available. If she's out of the office, I might be available. So please keep us both in the loop. I also want to welcome all of you to our large LPC family. At this point, we have 103 local governments across the state of Colorado who are benefiting from these LPC grants. It's 68 projects. We've got quite a few multi-jurisdictional projects, and essentially this funding is supporting 49% of all eligible local governments across the state. So we're excited about supporting all of you. And over to Jessica now. We're going to go back and forth. So Jessica, go right ahead.
Okay. This is what we have teed up for you today. Our goal is to provide a summary of the program and guidance on what is expected of you now that you have been awarded. Specifically, we'll do a deep dive into reporting requirements. Please speak up and ask questions. We'll try to pause throughout the presentation to address anything in the chat. But if you are thinking it, it's very likely that someone else is too, so please don't be shy. Next. For jurisdictions with personnel as part of your project, we invite you to stay on at 2 p.m. Although we have already worked with most of you to onboard your employees, we are happy to address any lingering questions or cover anything that may be specific to your project. We can wrap up early too if no one has any personnel related topics to discuss, but we will stay on it too with anyone who's interested. Next. Okay. Our goal is to help your communities succeed. We welcome your suggestions and feedback as we are continuously striving to improve this process, making it as smooth and straightforward as possible. We are always listening and adapting based on what we hear from you all. So please let us know if there's anything we could be doing better to support you.
All righty. So in general, the thing that we are here to do is support your community, but also we have to make sure that as grant funds get spent, that we are managing, that we're good stewards of public resources. These are taxpayer dollars, and we know that sooner or later, every grant program will get audited, and that means an auditor may pull one of your transactions, one of your expense reports, one of your narrative reports, and they're looking for all the minimum required documentation that's just kind of general grant management best practices, general accounting, generally accepted accounting practices. And so what we are required to do is to help you have clean audit results and us too. So we're looking for whether the math adds up, we're tallying up the dollar amounts, we're looking at the descriptions and the invoices. and making sure that the work that's happening matches the contract and all these things, right? So we're doing our due diligence to try and help your community as well as DOLA with that. So before we get into the grant stuff, I just want to share a couple things. You may already be familiar with our Housing Strategies Peer Exchange. This is something we do in partnership with some of the other planning grant programs in DOLA's Community Development Office. So we kind of rotate what topics get featured each month. The fast track or LPC related topics, Prop 123 topics, happen about once a quarter. And but if you want to block your calendar for the third Thursday of every month, these are great opportunities to learn what's happening and really for Colorado communities to share with each other. So we think there's a lot of great learning happening, and we hope that someday when we reach out and say, we love what your community is doing with your LPC grant, would you please share with other communities so others can learn? And in the meantime, take advantage of all the other sessions. So coming up in August, local financing strategies. This is examples of communities that have maybe passed a lodging tax measure or are utilizing short-term rental fees or some other local funding source that can pair with like state and federal funds to help build affordable housing. And then in September, we'll be doing a fast track panel discussion. So you'll get to hear from communities that are maybe a little farther along in their fast track implementation. And hopefully that is also helpful. By the way, all the links for everything we're covering in today's webinar, this recording, these slides, and all the relevant links, like how to sign up for the peer exchange, it's all going in an email that everyone will receive. So just rest assured, you don't have to frantically, write all the notes. You'll have everything. Okay, fast track is a top priority for this program. The reason it was put into Prop 123, the reason this program was created was the recognition that if local governments are going to implement fast track, they're going to need some help. In addition, they're going to need help in general tackling the housing crisis. And so this program does both. But when we award grant funds, we want to make sure that fast track is something that happens during your grant implementation efforts, even if it's not your main focus. You might be a rural community and just say, yeah, we already comply. But we are looking for you to successfully implement or codify a fast track policy by the statutory deadline, which is December 31st of 2026. And there are lots of resources. Once you have it on our fast track website, once you have adopted, you'll want to submit documentation of policy adoption through the Prop 123 portal. And once you've done that, you'll be eligible for $50,000 of incentive funding if you do it early. More on that in a minute. So the Fast Track website is easy to find. Prop 123 Fast Track pops to the top of your Google search. And then there are lots of, interpretations of the law, what it says, what that means, best practices. And there's lots of local flexibility for how you might implement in your community. There's also a couple of downloadable resources, including a local government self-assessment checklist. That's what DOLA is using when we're determining whether your local policy meets all the statutory requirements in Proposition 123. So we thought you should have that so you can say, oh yeah, I didn't think about the extensions or the developer opt-out or any of those nuances. And we've provided a downloadable resolution with some of the key language that you would want to include. Of course, you can modify that. You could borrow that language and drop it into an ordinance if that's how your community is going to approach it. And we're available for technical assistance throughout. So you just reach out by phone, email, schedule a meeting with us. We can chat through all your questions about the fast track requirements. We can offer a courtesy review of draft policy language before you're presenting to your governing body and before they adopt the final policy. It might be helpful if you've heard from DOLA that it's likely to meet all the requirements. Real briefly, what does fast track require? It says 90 days per application, and it doesn't apply to all applications or all housing projects. Specifically, there's some things excluded, but specifically things like site plans or building permits, conditional use permits, variances. We've got a list of what we think the statute requires. And fast track is required when 50% of the housing units in a housing project are affordable. You can define affordability in your local policy. And the start and the end of those 90 days are measured by a complete application, which you can define what constitutes a complete application, what starts that clock, so to speak. And then the end of 90 days is a final decision, which means either approval or denial. It does not always mean approval. Developers can opt out. And then there are things that are excluded, like subdivisions, division of land, some of those early things that happen at the beginning, annexations, rezonings, and things that happen at the end, like appeals. Comp plan amendments do not require fast track. And the law allows for extensions, both for the developer and the local government. And it really allows a lot of localized, tailored policy approaches. So plenty of flexibility. So again, fast track is required by the end of 2026. Good planning work takes time, so we encourage you to get started. And early adoption has benefits, which is why DOLA announced an incentive for early adoption of fast track. Again, you don't have to adopt early, but if you do adopt before the end of 2025, we're offering up to $50,000 in supplemental grant funding with no local match. Those funds are just added to your existing grant agreement, and you get to decide what new scope of work would you like to do, or would you like to extend the amount of funding available on your existing grant, for example, if you have personnel. And if you adopt after 2025, but in that first half of 2026, there will still be incentive funds available to you. We're just saying it's going to be something less than 50,000, but it might be 48,000. But we sort of depends on how much funding remains available in the fiscal year. But we do expect you'll get something even if you adopt in early 2026 through June 30th of 2026. And then in our quarterly reporting, just to note that fast track will be asked, what's the status? How far along are you with the effort? So if you haven't really started the fast track effort, you might tell us we're planning to start in this amount of time. We think we'll be adopting around that point in time. And if you've already adopted, some of you have, you could just put NA, or you can say, already check that off the list, or maybe there's still some implementation or some lessons learned that are happening post-adoption. So those are things you can share with us in quarterly reporting. Briefly, just wanted to make you all aware that DOLA recently published guidance on Prop 123 unit counting. That was back in, mid-spring of 2025. So if you haven't checked that out, it's a great resource. And the Prop 123 compliance website is where you'll find all of that, both the guidance document and the reporting portal. That's where you'll report your fast track policy adoption and your unit counts. And this is a separate portal from the grants portal where you applied for this grant and where you are going to report your expenses on the grant. Two different portals. They're both pretty easy to navigate. And our DOLA's Prop 123 community support team, who Jessica and I work closely with, but they are not Jessica and I, great people that are happy to meet with you in person or virtually and help your community navigate all things Prop 123. They have downloadable tools like a spreadsheet for helping you track any new affordable housing units that count towards your Prop 123 commitment. Alrighty, and I believe at this time, we're going to hand it back over to Jessica, but before she gets started, any questions in the chat, or does anybody want to speak up and share your question verbally? All righty then. I think we can move along, Jessica. Oh,
Oh,
we've got Sean. Go right ahead, Sean.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thanks. I was having trouble with my microphone earlier. I just wanted to make sure because I did read that in the self-assessment checklist, another option to a resolution or an ordinance is a policy adopting the expedited review process. Wanted to hear it from the source. Is that correct?
Yeah, so policies and procedures, resolution, ordinance, land use code update. We're hearing communities do a wide variety of approaches, and it's really what works best for you. Some communities might have an administrative manual that outlines policies and procedures, and that's a more flexible way for them to implement versus putting in the land use code. But other communities
Yeah.
say, oh no, this has got to go in our land use code, right? So it's really, you know, your community, you know what policy approach hopefully meets your needs, and we will accept whatever feels appropriate for your community. Does that make sense? And does that answer the
Okay.
question?
Yeah, absolutely does, and certainly appreciate having that flexibility because that is going to be the best option for us. Yeah.
Some folks even, I'll just share, have some like developer checklists and process mapping and toolkits and things like that. Because if the goal is help your developer move through the process quickly, we've heard from local governments that sometimes those developers don't get you what you need. So your checklist or your guide to them might help them do a better job in their submissions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Robin. Jessica, appreciate it. Yeah,
Sure.
that's great.
Right. Anything else? All right, over to you, Jessica.
okay. We're gonna dive into the grant content now. Um, Almost all of you have your executed grant agreements. However, there are a few of you from round 5 who don't just yet. As a quick recap, the award letter is the notice to you and your team that your application was funded, but it is the executed grant agreement that acts as the official contract with DOLA, which you will receive via DocuSign. If you don't have a copy of your fully executed grant or are unsure about the date your grant was executed, please reach out to us. Any expenses that occurred before the date of your executed grant agreement cannot and will not be reimbursed. We recommend that you hold off on signing contractor or vendor agreements or making any official job offers until the grant is executed. Next slide. I would like to highlight some of the important parts of your executed grant agreement. We have the project description, work description, and outcomes. These key sections are specific to your project, so please make sure to spend time familiarizing yourself with these as well as your project budget. Again, all 3 of these are tailored and specific to your project outcomes. We have created a grant management and reporting guidance for local planning capacity as a resource to help you interpret and understand your grant agreement. You can find a copy of these on the LPC website under the resources for LPC grantees, along with some other helpful stuff that we have provided to you over email that you may not have anymore. So that is a good place to look. If something new comes up that wasn't originally included in your project description, or if there's a change in your scope of work, please contact us before proceeding. Next slide. Shown here are the 4 budget line items that are eligible for LPC funding. Your grant will only include the budget lines that apply to your project. The project work description outlined and detailed in your scope of work correlate to these eligible expenses. And Robin, would you like to share some of the new eligible expenses that were just announced?
Yes. We just published new LPC grant program guidelines with a few new eligible expenses. Specifically, we're allowing new funding requests for comprehensive land use code updates or comp plan updates. Previously, we would only cover the housing related portion of that work, but now it can be comprehensive. So you can always think about that for a future request or for use with your incentive funds. And then we're also allowing what we call preliminary planning and analysis costs for a housing development site. That's kind of like pre-development, but we are a planning grant and we have to stay in the planning lane. So if we can consider this preliminary planning, such as doing a conceptual site plan or a study on the infrastructure costs or having an architect or an engineer design the parcel, of course, community development community engagement costs that might be related, environmental site assessment, property conditions assessment, market study, feasibility study, traffic study, all the kinds of things you might need. Those could now be funded by LPC funds. And again, this is not in your grant agreement because it was not previously allowable, but in the future, you could make a future request or again, use your incentive funds once you've adopted Fast Track. Back to you, Jessica, unless there are
Okay.
any quick questions on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there might be. All righty, back to you, Jessica.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. What are direct costs? As defined in your grant agreement, direct costs are those that are identified as program-specific allowable costs of implementing the grant program objectives. In order to be eligible, expenses need to be directly related to grant activities and outcomes. Some examples of these are printing large maps or direct mailers. Translation services for inclusive community engagement is another good one. It is common for grants to allow indirect costs. However, LPC is not one of them. So these types of general operating expenses are not reimbursable under LPC. Please ask if you're not sure. It's better to be safe than sorry and commit to something that's not eligible for reimbursement. Next slide. Okay. Ineligible expenses. This language is exactly what you will see in your grant agreement. If a reimbursement request includes one of these items, we will suspend it back to you and you will be asked to subtract that dollar amount, resulting in your jurisdiction covering this expense. Job posting or recruiting costs, indirect overhead, general operating expenses, housing construction, pre-development, lobbying, and food are not eligible under your reimbursement. Robin, I think back to you now.
All righty. So on the procurement guidance, we have shared with you a document that's called LPC Grantee Procurement Guidance. And so that kind of walks you through the steps of what's allowable, what's not. Generally speaking, same as most all state and federal grants, you do need to have some kind of competitive selection process for procurement and or hiring. DOLA does not have strict requirements about that as long as you've sought at least multiple quotes. The RFP, RFQ is the pretty standard process, but as long as you're following your local procurement rules or your HR rules, you should be okay. Happy to answer questions about that. Everyone seems to have kind of unique circumstances. We do not need to review your RFP before it's posted, but if you'd like us to, we're happy to do that. What we do need is once you have signed an agreement with your consultant, you must share a copy of that with DOLA. We just keep it on file. And what we're looking for is, does the scope of work for that consultant match the scope of work in your grant agreement? Occasionally, we discover that you've signed an agreement with somebody, not you, of course, but somebody else, some grantees have signed an agreement with a consultant to do a bunch of work that is actually not eligible under this grant program, and we have to say, uh-oh, please do not do that work because we will not be able to reimburse. We can reimburse this, but not that. So that's why we look at it. And then we're also looking at, things like the maximum dollar amount. So anyway, just please share that as soon as you have the fully executed agreement with your consultant. Same with the job description for a new employee being hired with or partial, if the salary is partially covered by LPC grant funds, we do need a copy of the job description before that person begins work. And again, we encourage you not to sign any agreements until after your grant agreement's execution date. Alrighty, so the milestones and performance measures is the next section in your grant agreement that we want to bring your attention to. There is a table. What you see on the screen is more or less what you see in your grant agreement, but everybody's is tailored just a little bit to yours. And I'm going to get into these, so don't feel like you have to read everything. So the first one is what we call the baseline estimate. Basically, at the beginning of your grant, after it's been executed, we ask you to complete this very short Google form. Somebody in your planning or building department, community development, probably needs to complete the form because we're asking you to contemplate or analyze before this grant program begins, what is our development review process and how many days approximately does it take to review a site plan or a building permit or a conditional use permit? And in that Google form, you can give us nuanced answers. Well, building permits are pretty quick, about this many days, but a variance can take up, a range from this to this. So that's what we're looking at. Keep in mind things like subdivisions are exempt. So you don't need to tell us the subdivisions take months and months and months or years. But please do give us some nuance in your answers on the number of days. And the point of this form is that at the end of the grant, once you've adopted Fast Track, once we close out the grant, you'll be able to reflect on the degree to which this grant helped you shorten that time, streamline the process for review. And, there's staff turnover, and DOLA is just kind of hanging on to that data so that your staff someday down the road who don't remember what was submitted way back at the beginning of the grant, we've got that data to share with you. I want to emphasize that this data is considered confidential. We're not sharing it with anyone. We're primarily using this to help you remember in the future and for us to have some aggregated data on, well, urban jurisdictions are like this, but rural jurisdictions are, have review times like that. And just kind of overall have some grant program impact stats. Okay, so the questions are, kind of like this. Measuring from the beginning of a complete application to a final decision. What's your process like? Do you already have some kind of an expedited review policy? Some communities do, but they're still working on refinement in order to comply with Prop 123. So that's just a general sense of that first milestone. The second thing is probably consultant procurement. And again, the grant agreement says you should begin that procurement process within the first 3 months. So if you haven't started yet, please begin. If it's a year down the road and you have not started consultant procurement, you will not be in good standing. We will not be happy. We want you to begin, even if, it's okay if you posted an RFP, you didn't get enough responses, you need to post it again. Now you're 6 months down the road and you still haven't really begun grant related work. That's okay. You're making effort, right? You're making progress, and that's what we want you to communicate with us. And then something important to emphasize, if you are utilizing an existing consultant who's done work with you before, maybe you already have a contract with them, we need you to draft a new scope of work for the LPC grant related expenses. And if their invoices include some of that other work and some of this work, that's fine, but they need to be separated or a totally separate invoice, either separate sections within one invoice or totally separated into separate invoices. Alrighty, job description. Please share a copy of the final job description. You can share a draft and we may give you feedback and say, uh-oh, you need to revise the job description in this way, and then make sure you share back a final draft. The job description, the key thing we're looking for is that if you told us this person is 100% related to LPC grant activities, housing, Prop 123, land use code changes to incentivize housing, the job description should reflect 100% of that person's time. Or if this person is only 30% of their time, the job description should show 30% and the other 70% is other stuff. So if it doesn't, that's where we're going to ask you for changes. And oh, and then if you did have an existing employee and they are changing roles to take on this new work, we do need to see a before and after. What were they doing before? How is their new job description different? That's the kind of documentation we need. Alrighty, deliverables include both the draft deliverables before it's been presented to your governing body for adoption, and also the final policy after it's been finalized, right? So when your consultant has finished their part and they've presented to you and you've completed your review and you're getting ready for that public hearing, that's the version that we want to see. We don't need to see the consultant's first draft. We kind of want to see the consultant's final draft before it goes to public hearing. And the point of this is that we're reviewing and kind of giving you feedback on, oops, you may have forgotten something important that you may want to edit before council votes on it. And after it's adopted, please share the final adopted version. Alrighty, grant reporting requirements. Before we move into that, do we have any questions about those deliverables and milestones that we just covered? Anything in the chat? Alrighty, raise your hand at any time. Okay, Jessica, is this over to you or is this still me? Sorry, still me. All right, so key thing on grant reporting is that your grant agreement says whether you are quarterly or monthly. If you have a personnel budget line item, if we're covering an employee of your local government, you definitely have monthly. There are a couple other communities that have monthly for specific reasons, but otherwise, if you do not have personnel, you are probably quarterly. Quarterly reports are always, or I should say, reports in general are always due on the 30th day after the end of the quarter or the end of the month. So that's kind of easy to remember. You've got about 4 weeks to get things in order before it's due. So for example, your July through September consultant invoices are due October 30th, which is 30 days after the end of the quarter. Your July personnel expenses would be due 1 month later at the end of August. But there is an important exception, which is fiscal year end. We just got done with fiscal year end. So any of you who went through that with us, you know that it is some special reporting. And the key thing to know is that it happens early. So the state fiscal year ends June 30th, and any expenses that happened in June or May or anything need to be reported early by July 15th. So most of you won't need to worry about this till next summer. But some of you maybe just went through that, and just remember it happens every year. We send you reminders about all the special things you have to do. And basically, if you don't have expenses documented yet, like the check hasn't been issued for the consultant's work that happened in June, then you'll have to report it as an accrual, which is basically just tell us approximately this dollar amount needs to be accrued. And then as soon as you do have that proof of payment, you get that submitted in the grant portal. We clear the accrual and you're all good and you don't have to worry about that until next summer. All right, so the key things, this is where I hand over to you, right, Jessica?
Sure. Okay, so I'm kind of the first line of defense on grant reporting, so I will work closely with you when you first submit your reports in the portal. We have 3 different forms, and I'll go over them in depth, and some of you have already had a crash course in this for fiscal year end. But we have a reimbursement request form, the quarterly narrative status update, and the personal activity report form. Next slide. We have provided you with an all-in-one spreadsheet called the LPC reports form. There are separate tabs for each of the forms that were listed on the previous screen, including some examples and additional instructions. If you do not have a copy of that, reach out to us, but I'm about to go a lot more in depth on each of those. So we will move on to the next slide, please. So this is the reimbursement request form. There are currently 2 versions of it, and this is the Excel option. You will hear Robin and I refer to it often as the RFR. This must accompany every reimbursement request you submit in the portal. I like to think about it like it's the accounting top sheet for your expense report. When completing the RFR, please separate out itemized invoices or budget lines. Do not ask for your full reimbursement request on one line. We need all the correlating details regarding invoices, dates, payment, and detail like that spelled out. So please complete the form accurately and fully. On the bottom, we have the project expense summary that also is important to keep up to date. This helps us to keep track of your budget by the budget line categories and is a tool that allows us to compare numbers to ensure that we're on the same page. The signature at the bottom must be by whoever was identified as the responsible administrator in the grant, not who is submitting in the portal. This must be a wet signature or a certified digital signature. We cannot accept someone's name just typed in the box. Next slide. This is the fillable PDF version of the reimbursement or request for reimbursement form. And this is the version that meets all of the digital accessibility standards. So feel free to use whichever version works best for you. What is notable and different about this form is that you must enter your match percentage at the top right. Unlike the Excel version that we were just looking at, you manually enter the match amount of 20% or 50% or whatever it may be, and the calculations from there should auto-populate the rest of the form. Do we have any questions about these 2 forms? Okay, next slide. This is the narrative status update form. This we ask that you submit in a Google form, but we have included it in the packet of reports as an opportunity together with your team to draft your answers. The Google form link is circled and can be found on this sheet in your document packet. You will receive a copy of your form responses once you've submitted it, and we recommend that you save these for your records and for future reference. Please focus on anything new or different that you haven't already told us. There's no need to repeat what you've previously reported. This doesn't have to be an essay. It can be brief and concise. Non-applicable is always an appropriate response if you have nothing to report. And apologies to those of you who report monthly. Please remember to submit this quarterly, even if you don't have any expenses to report. So you may report 1 or 2 of these before you have grant-related expenses as you do project launch. Okay, next slide. This is the personnel activities report form. This is only for those of you who have personnel as a budget line item. If you'd like to stay on at 2 o'clock, we will go over this in depth then. Everyone else can disregard this form. Okay, now we're going to talk about the DLG grant portal. Many of you are already familiar with this. This is where your jurisdiction submitted the grant application, and this is where you'll submit your reimbursement request. Please make sure that you are always using your own personal account. So if you don't have one yet, please create one. There's no need to use the username and password of a current or past colleague. Please don't share accounts. Using your own personal account ensures that you will receive all communication and notification affiliated with your project. So if you're using your colleague's account and we suspend the request back to you, you may not receive that notice, and then your report will be pending. So please don't do that. Next slide. The third arrow is where you need to start and request access to the project. When requesting access, search for LPC and your project number. It will take us roughly 24 to 48 hours to approve you, and I will send you an email once your account has been approved to be associated with the project. Your account can be associated with multiple projects. Likewise, your project can have multiple accounts associated with it. Once you have access to your project, the highlighted box shown here is where you will go to access the LPC grant. You will select the project and go to the financial tab, which is not shown on this slide, but that is what you will highlight. And then your project information will appear. From there, you'll click Add Report. And if this report button is not highlighted blue, that means that you have a pending request in the system already. The portal is designed to only handle one request at a time. So once that previous report has been processed, you'll be able to submit a new one. Let me see.
Sorry, was I on the wrong slide or the right slide?
I think we're good.
Okay.
For your first report, the period start date must be on or after your executed grant agreement. For every report after, please put the start date of the first day of the reporting month or quarter. And the end date is just that, the end date of the reporting period. However, there is also a service start date and end date, which is kind of confusing. Those dates need to fall within the reporting period and must capture the dates on the invoices or the payroll reports for when the work was completed. If these dates are incorrect and do not align with the period or your documentation, we will have to suspend this back to you to fix. Robin, do you have anything else to say about that? I feel like it's kind of been an issue lately.
The thing to think about is if you are reporting payroll and the pay period started on July 8th and it goes through August 7th, that is your period date. And that covers the majority of July. So you might just say the period date is July 1 through July 31st. But the service date is actually like exactly the first day worked to the last day worked, right? So service means work that happened. Period is like the report period, right? So that's kind of the way I like to think of that distinction.
Yeah, if your service dates say August 1st to October 30th, but you submit an invoice that says July 15th, we'll have to suspend that back to you so you can update that service start date to the 15th. It's a little confusing and we'll work with you on it. Just be aware that the dates we are checking that, and accounting is very particular about that. So look at your invoices thoroughly and try to capture that period range as accurately as possible. Okay, back to the portal. Oh, nope, I need that slide still. So section number 2 that's highlighted here, you are required to add something. You cannot leave this empty, so just type something short and sweet in there. Number 3, is this your final request? The answer will always be no until it is really your final request. And you'll submit your final request when your grant is ready to close out. So if that accidentally gets checked, I'll suspend it back to you and you'll have to fix that. Number 4 shows optional documents, and you can add up to 3. It is our preference that you combine everything into one document, but we understand if you need to have a couple separate attachments every once in a while. Next slide. Can we go? Oh, there we go. Okay. One line is sufficient for each budget line item. It's not necessary for you to submit each expense separately in the portal. Rather, summarize each budget line, which again are consultant services, personnel, software, and equipment. Versus on the RFR form, we ask that you itemize each invoice in the correlating information there. This is where you can subtotal each category by the budget line expense. You will also upload your documentation packet here, which will always need to include the signed and completed RFR form, the personnel activity report form, if that applies to you, all consultant invoices, and proof of payment. And we'd like to have that all PDF'd into one packet. Please have this documentation organized to the best of your ability, with the correlating invoices and proof of payment paired together, or any other documentation put together in a way that's easy for us to review. We really appreciate that little effort. Then from here, you'll click submit your report. Once everything looks good, you'll have another chance to proof the report, and then you will certify and submit it. We are here to help with this. You're welcome to send over your first few reports, and I can do pre-review so we can look at it without dealing with it in the portal. Also, if you hit a roadblock in the portal, please just call Robin or I. We don't want you to be super frustrated with this process. So, I think that is all for now on this. Oh, just kidding. Do we have any questions about the portal before I move on? Okay. What must accompany your reimbursement are invoices, the invoices from your consultant or vendor, payroll report, and proof of payment. If the description of activities on the invoices are too vague, we will have to request that you go back to your consultant for additional detail. We cannot approve reimbursements when we cannot confidently verify that the work completed and being billed for is grant and project related. So please tell your consultants from the start that DOLA requires specific details in their work description and that the billing category is not enough. We all that you have your consultants bill or invoice you on a monthly basis. Robin.
All right, so just to recap, Jessica covered a lot, but basically quarterly or monthly reporting depends on your grant agreement. Financial reports, dollars go in the portal, and the documentation for those dollars goes in the portal. But things that we call performance measures or draft deliverables, things like consultant agreements or a report that your consultant did, those can just come over email. If you put them in the portal, that's fine. But sometimes they're big files. Just send them to us by email. That makes it easy. And we also love photos, or like you had a community engagement event. If you want to share a link to your website that highlights all this stuff, or a news article that featured your work, just share it with us over email. We love that. And you don't have to wait till quarterly reporting. You can just send it at any time. And then the final report, again, at the very, very end, not before. And final report comes after policy adoption, right? After you're done with the fast track, after you're done with whatever it is that the grant is paying for. So closeout and final reporting, you got a long time before you need to start thinking about this. And when you are ready, we've got a guidance document that walks you through the steps. Something to remember is that when you're getting close to the end, that final consultant invoice might run into the 5% retainage on the grant agreement. And we're not going to be able to reimburse that last 5% until everything is totally done. So you may be done spending, the consultant may be done. You may have said, thanks for your work. Now we've got some staff implementation and council's still got to do the policy adoption. We're going to have to hold on to the 5% retainage for a little while, but you're done reporting expenses for now. So keep that in mind. We've got tools and things to help you at that point. And you might be tempted to check that final report box on the request for reimbursement form and in the portal. And we might say, oh, no, you're not ready. But we'll work with you again. But when you are really, really, really ready, then you're going to check that final report box. In the portal, it's a yes, no. And then after your grant expiration date, you still have 90 days to complete all of the reporting, right? So the grant expiration date on your grant agreement, that date just means all the dollars have to be finished spending, right? You're done spending and you can still be wrapping up grant reporting and closeout. There's a whole video tutorial about this. We'll share that link. The link is in these slides. So if you ever want to watch that video tutorial, it walks you through that. And again, that link to that video tutorial is also in the grant management guidance document that's posted on the LPC webpage. Okay, again, grant closeout, you've got 90 days. This is literally what it says in your grant agreement, so you can always read this in your grant agreement. And just be thinking about 95% of the grant costs can get paid out as interim reports, and that final payment happens when we close out the grant. Alrighty. In the grant agreement, there's this little section 4.6 that says DOLA acknowledgement. So if you are doing a press release or a flyer, or you've got a website, or your consultants produce the final report, we love it if you could just work in, this work was partially funded by the Department of Local Affairs. Just put DOLA, Department of Local Affairs. We're not the Division of Housing, so we're just put DOLA. And we can provide logos. So logos are available upon request. We've got various different file types. You tell us what your graphic designer needs and we'll get you copies of logos. And again, we love those photos. So if you had a groundbreaking and you want to share a picture, if the housing that you were working on got built and you're really proud of that, we love having pictures. So share. So that really concludes the main stuff we wanted to cover today. It's not yet 2 o'clock, so we've got plenty of time to answer any questions you might have. You can be brave and turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, or just put it in the chat and we can answer either way. And if you have no questions, you are also welcome to say goodbye and move on with your day. Do we have any questions? Hopefully that was all straightforward. And I'm thinking we can probably go ahead and stop the recording. Oh, Brian, go right ahead.
Hey guys, since we have both personnel expenses and consultant expenses in our grant award, am I correct that both of those need to be invoiced and reported monthly?
Basically,
Yes.
the personnel we assume is happening every month, and then consultant invoices basically, as soon as you have a payment available, the documentation of a payment, just slide those into whichever monthly report is next, right?
Okay, so they do not need to be the exact same, like the pay periods for employees do not need to be exactly the same as the invoice periods for consultants.
Correct. And that leads me to answering your question in this way. Let's say the pay period started on July 8th and the consultant started on July 1, then the beginning of the service date is going to be July 1 because that is the earliest date. And if the pay period went all the way through August 8th, that's going to be the end of the service date, right? So you want the service dates to capture the earliest date that work happened and the latest date that work happened. All right. Did I see a question from Clorinda? Anybody else? Okay, we'll just hang out for a little while in case folks have questions. Questions about fast track, questions about Prop 123 unit counts, any of those things are totally fine. Right, hearing none. I'm thinking that we can probably, oh, I do see something in the chat. No questions, thanks. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and suggest that we wrap up. It's almost 2 o'clock. Just know you can reach out to us at any time, folks.